A chill wind swept through the ancient hills of Wales, carrying with it the whispers of stories long forgotten. Beneath the shadow of towering mountains and the mist of early morning, the land seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Here, magic was not just a tale told around the fire, it was a living, breathing force. It was in the earth, the sky, and the hearts of the people. In the quiet rustle of leaves, the faint call of birds in the distance, and the shimmer of the moon over the sea, the old gods still lingered, their presence woven into every rock, every tree, every corner of the land. Among the figures that had long walked these paths was Rhiannon. She was not just a woman, not merely a queen. She was something more, something that transcended the limits of time and mortal understanding. The world she inhabited was a world where the lines between the ordinary and the extraordinary blurred, where each story carried a weight greater than any single lifetime could bear. And in that world, Rhiannon's story became one of the most enduring, a tale that echoed through the centuries. Her name came from the mists, carried by the voices of the ancient bards and whispered in the winds. She was not just a figure in Welsh mythology, she was a symbol. A symbol of power, of love, of tragedy, and of rebirth. Her story was written in the Mabinogi, the great collection of Welsh tales that were as much a part of the land as the mountains themselves. These stories, steeped in magic and mystery, were the very soul of Wales, its heart beating with the pulse of ancient gods, heroic deeds, and the passions of those who dared to reach beyond the known world. But Rhiannon was different. She stood apart, a figure both distant and close, both divine and human. Her birth, her rise to power, her trials, each step of her journey was marked by a strange magic, a force that seemed to stretch the boundaries of what was possible. In a world where gods and mortals danced together on the edge of reality, Rhiannon's life unfolded like a song, both beautiful and haunting. Her birds, sacred creatures that followed her wherever she went, were more than just companions. They were messengers of fate, agents of change, and symbols of something far beyond the earthly world. Their calls, sweet and sorrowful, carried with them the weight of prophecy, the echoes of the past, and the whispers of what was to come. To understand Rhiannon's story is to understand the deep connection between the living and the mystical, between the present and the ancient world. She was a bridge, a link between the mundane and the magical. Her birds, her kingdom, her people, everything about her was touched by forces that could not be easily explained. And yet, despite the vastness of her legend, Rhiannon's story is not just one of gods and magic. It is a story that resonates deeply with the human experience, the longing for justice, the sorrow of loss, and the courage to face even the most impossible trials. Rhiannon's origin was as mysterious as the land itself. She did not come from ordinary beginnings. Her birth was marked by a strange, otherworldly power. Some say she was born from the sea, emerging like a goddess from the foam, while others claim she was the daughter of a great king. But what mattered most was not where she came from, but what she represented, a force that could not be contained by the ordinary world, a woman who moved through the shadows and light of life with the grace of a queen and the power of a goddess. Her connection to the otherworld was unmistakable. She was not bound by the same rules that govern mortals. Her life was intertwined with the cycles of magic that pulsed through the land. The birds that followed her, as white as snow and as fierce as the storm, were her closest companions. They were no ordinary creatures. In the world of Welsh myth, birds were more than just animals. They were creatures of the gods, symbols of power and transformation. They could carry messages across the realms, speak to the dead, and foresee the future. And for Rhiannon, they were her voice when she had none, her strength when she was weak, and her hope when the world seemed dark. Every flutter of their wings spoke of the ancient past, of times when gods walked among men, and when the line between the living and the dead was not as clear as it is now. The birds were a reminder of the power of fate, of how the gods themselves could shape the course of history with a single word, a single act. For Rhiannon, they were her constant companions, guiding her through the highs and lows of her life, from the moment of her birth to the trials that would one day test her very soul. The birds were not just magical beings, they were symbols of Rhiannon herself. Just as they soared through the skies, free and unbound, so too did she. She was not a woman confined by the rules of kings or the expectations of society. Her power came from within, from the deep well of magic that flowed through her veins. Her birds were her reflection, wild, untamed, and fiercely independent. They were her voice, carrying her message to the world, warning of the danger that loomed, or heralding the triumph that awaited her. But they were also a warning, a reminder that even the greatest of powers must face their own trials. Rhiannon's connection to the birds went beyond the physical. They were a manifestation of her spirit, her deepest desires, and her most hidden fears. Each bird that flew with her was a piece of her soul, a fragment of the vast, untamable force that she was. Together, they were more than just a queen and her followers. They were a symbol of the eternal struggle between fate and free will, between love and loss, between the magical and the mortal. As the wind howled through the valleys and the trees whispered their ancient secrets, Rhiannon's story unfolded. It was a story that began with the magic of her birth, the mystery of her origin, and the power of her connection to the otherworld. But it was also a story of deep emotions, of loss, of sorrow, of the lengths a mother would go to protect her child. The birds, those strange and beautiful creatures that followed her every step, were more than just symbols of her power. They were the heartbeat of her story, the constant reminder that, even in a world filled with magic, there was nothing more powerful than the love of a mother and the bond that ties us all together, no matter where we come from or what we face. The sound of hooves echoed in the distance, carried by the wind that rustled through the trees. It was not the sound of an ordinary horse, but something otherworldly, a rhythm that seemed to resonate with the very heartbeat of the land. When Rhiannon rode, the earth itself seemed to acknowledge her presence, and the wind whispered her name like an ancient chant. Her horses were not mere creatures of flesh and bone, they were vessels of magic, creatures that moved between worlds with a grace no mortal could hope to understand. Rhiannon's connection to her horses went beyond the ordinary. It was said that she rode with the power of the gods themselves, a force that coursed through her and her steeds, creating a bond that could not be broken. Her horses were more than just companions, they were extensions of her soul, mirrors of the power that flowed through her veins. They were as wild as the wind and as free as the skies, and together they ruled the earth beneath them. Celtic myths tell of many horses, but none were like those that carried Rhiannon. In the world of the Celts, horses were sacred beings, often tied to the supernatural and the divine. They were the messengers of the gods, the creatures that could move between the living world and the otherworld. These horses were not bound by the rules of nature, they could gallop through the skies, cross the seas, and even travel through time. They were creatures of mystery, and when Rhiannon rode, she was carried by that same magic. Her horses were said to be as fast as the wind, their hooves never touching the ground, their bodies gliding through the air like spirits. They were creatures of beauty, their coats as white as the moon and their eyes shining with an intelligence that seemed beyond the reach of mortal comprehension. To see Rhiannon upon her horses was to see a goddess in motion, elegant, powerful, and untouchable. She did not ride them, she became one with them. The bond between them was so strong that it was said she could command them with a single thought, guiding them across the land and through the sky with a flick of her wrist. But these were not just any horses, they were horses of the otherworld, beings that carried Rhiannon between the living and the divine. In Celtic myth, the otherworld was a place of magic and mystery, a realm where the gods lived and where the boundaries between life and death, past and future, were blurred. The horses that carried Rhiannon were born of this world, forged from the magic of the gods themselves. They were creatures of mystery, as much a part of the supernatural as the land they roamed. Rhiannon's power was reflected in the horses she rode. They were not just symbols of her strength, they were the embodiment of her grace, her wisdom, and her connection to the divine. When she rode, she moved with a power that seemed to come from the earth itself, as if the very soil beneath her feet bowed in respect to her. The horses responded to her will, their every movement in perfect harmony with her thoughts. They were her partners, not her servants, and together they were unstoppable, bound by a magic that neither mortal nor god could control. There was something haunting about the way Rhiannon moved on her horses. It was as if she was both a part of the earth and beyond it, her body flowing with the rhythm of nature itself. Her horses were her companions in the truest sense, they shared in her power, her grace, and her connection to the otherworld. They were the creatures that carried her into the unknown, guiding her through the trials and tribulations that lay ahead. In many ways, Rhiannon's horses were the key to her story. They were not just tools of transportation, they were the means by which she could move beyond the limits of the human world. Her connection to them allowed her to step into the realm of the gods, to cross the boundaries between life and death, and to move through time and space with a freedom few could ever hope to possess. They were her gateway to the supernatural, the bridge that allowed her to walk between the worlds. But it wasn't just the horses themselves that made Rhiannon's ride so powerful. It was the bond they shared, the deep, unspoken connection between rider and steed. In the world of Celtic mythology, the bond between a rider and their horse was sacred. It was said that a true rider could communicate with their horse without words, that the bond between them transcended language and reason. Rhiannon and her horses shared this bond, their thoughts and wills intertwined, each supporting the other as they moved through the world. When Rhiannon rode, it was not just the horses that were elevated, it was her. Her power became one with the earth beneath her, the wind around her, and the sky above her. She was no longer just a queen or a woman, she became something greater, something untouchable. The horses, with their supernatural speed and grace, carried her into the realm of the gods, and for a moment, she was one of them, immortal, powerful, and free. Her horses, as beautiful as they were also symbols of the strange and mystical nature of the world she inhabited. They were creatures born of the other world, and as such, they could not be fully understood by those who lived in the mortal realm. They were beyond comprehension, beyond the rules that governed the world of men. To see Rhiannon ride was to witness something truly magical, something that existed outside of time and space, a moment suspended in the air, where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural dissolved. The horses reflected Rhiannon's power in every way. Their speed was unmatched, their grace unparalleled, and their connection to the other world undeniable. They were not just animals, they were the very embodiment of the magic that flowed through Rhiannon's veins. When she rode, she was not simply a queen upon her throne, she was a goddess, riding with the power of the gods themselves. The horses were her companions, but they were also her reflection, wild, untamable, and forever bound to the mysteries of the world. And as Rhiannon galloped through the hills, the world around her seemed to change. The trees whispered, the earth shook, and the very air seemed to hum with the magic of her presence. With each passing moment, she and her horses became one, a single force of nature, moving with a power that no one could stop. They were creatures of the supernatural, bound together by a force that transcended the mortal world, and when they rode, they were unstoppable, like the wind, like the stars themselves. A scream echoed through the night, a cry that seemed to pierce the very fabric of the world. It was not just the cry of a newborn child, but something far deeper, an ancient sound that stirred the earth and the sky. The wind howled in response, and the trees bowed their heads as though they understood the weight of what had just occurred. Rhiannon, lying in a bed of furs, held her child close, her heart racing, her breath short. The world itself seemed to hold its breath as the tiny, fragile form in her arms let out its first cry. Pryderi, her son, had entered the world in a way that was unlike any other. From the very beginning, his birth was marked by magic, by something powerful, untamable, and profound. He was no ordinary child. His arrival was not just the joy of a mother and father, but the fulfillment of prophecies, the start of a destiny that would stretch across the land. The child in her arms was a link to the past and to the future, a living testament to forces beyond understanding. As the moments passed and the cries of her newborn son filled the air, the people of the land could feel it too, a shift, a change in the very air around them. It was as if the earth itself acknowledged the birth of this child, the child of Rhiannon, whose connection to the other world was undeniable. There were whispers in the village, murmurs that spoke of the omens that had surrounded her pregnancy. Strange happenings, moments of unexplainable wonder, had marked her time carrying the child. Rhiannon had felt the presence of something greater than herself, an invisible hand guiding her, pulling her towards something unknown. And now, as she held Pryderi, that unseen force seemed to settle around them both. The child was more than just a gift, he was a promise. In the world of the Celts, a child born under such circumstances was never ordinary. There were stories of children born under signs and omens, their fates entwined with prophecies that would shape kingdoms, change the course of history, and challenge the gods themselves. Pryderi's birth was no different. It wasn't just his arrival that was extraordinary, it was the very nature of his birth. For days before he was born, there had been signs, a vision of a stag, a flash of light in the sky, the sound of a harp played by no hands. Even Rhiannon herself had sensed something stirring within her, a feeling that something beyond her understanding was taking place. She had dreamed of a child who would change the world, a child with the power to bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine. But she could never have known, not truly, how profound those dreams would be. The birth itself was no less remarkable. There were no midwives, no attendants, just Rhiannon and the forces that surrounded her. It was said that when she gave birth, the very air seemed to bend, and time itself paused. The cries of her son echoed far beyond the walls of her chamber, carried on the wind like a call to the gods. In the moment of his birth, the land seemed to hold its breath. The future, it seemed, was held in the tiny hands of this child. But it was the strange events that followed that truly set Pryderi apart. Soon after his birth, there were reports from across the land of strange happenings, visions of a child with a crown upon his head, of a boy whose steps would leave tracks of fire behind him. There were those who spoke of a prophecy, a tale that had been passed down for generations, saying that Rhiannon's son would be the one to restore balance to the world, to bring unity between the kingdoms, to heal the broken lands. The prophecies were filled with riddles, with half-hidden truths that only the wisest could understand. But everyone knew one thing: Pryderi was destined for greatness. His early life was no less enchanted. The child grew at an extraordinary pace, his mind sharp and his heart full of wisdom beyond his years. It was as if he understood things that no child should understand, things about the world, about the gods, about the cycles of life and death. He had the grace of his mother, the strength of his father, and the fire of the ancient spirits that ran through his veins. Those who laid eyes upon him felt a strange power radiating from the boy, a power that seemed to touch not just the world around him, but the very core of who they were. It was as though he could see their deepest fears, their hidden desires, and their greatest regrets. But it was the prophecies that followed him, that clung to him like a shadow, that made the child's presence so unsettling. Some said that he would be the one to unite the divided tribes, that he would be the leader who would bring an end to the battles that had torn the land apart for generations. Others whispered that his arrival marked the beginning of the end, the death of old powers, the fall of kings and queens, the turning of the wheel of fate. And yet, there were those who saw in him a symbol of hope, a child who could bring about the change the world so desperately needed. The omens surrounding Pryderi's birth were not only signs of his future, but warnings as well. Rhiannon's joy was tempered by the knowledge that the child she held so closely was a living testament to a prophecy that had yet to be fulfilled. His fate was not his own, it was tied to the land, to the people, to the gods. And in that truth, there was both wonder and terror. Could she protect him from the forces that would seek to shape his destiny? Could she shelter him from the burden of the world that awaited him? Rhiannon knew that her son was more than just a child. He was the embodiment of everything that had come before him and everything that would follow. His birth had been foretold, his destiny written in the stars. But what was most extraordinary of all was the power that lay within him, the ancient magic that surged through his veins. From the very first moments of his life, the world seemed to bend around him, responding to his very presence. And yet, despite the weight of the prophecy, there was a tenderness to Rhiannon's love for her son. She did not see him as a tool for the gods or a pawn in a greater game. He was her child, her flesh and blood, and in his eyes, she saw the future, but also the innocence of the present. The world could wait, for now. In her arms, Pryderi was simply a child, one who needed the warmth of a mother's embrace and the safety of her love. But even as she held him, the whispers of fate continued, swirling around them both like a storm on the horizon. The child's destiny was already written, but the path that lay ahead was unknown. And in that uncertainty, the world stood still for a moment, as if holding its breath, waiting for the child to grow into the legend he was destined to become. The night Rhiannon gave birth, the heavens seemed to tremble. The stars blinked out one by one, and a soft, eerie glow settled over the land. It was as though the world itself paused, holding its breath in anticipation. In the quiet of her chamber, with only the sound of her own labored breathing breaking the stillness, Rhiannon's child was born into the world. Pryderi, her son. A boy who would carry the weight of prophecies, a child whose very existence would echo across generations. His first cry was not just the wail of a newborn, but a cry that seemed to resonate with the power of ancient forces. It was a sound that could stir the hearts of gods and men alike, for this child's birth had been foretold long before he drew his first breath. Rhiannon gazed down at her son, her heart filled with awe and fear. From the moment she had felt him stir within her, she had known that he was no ordinary child. The signs had been there all along. Dreams filled with visions, strange occurrences that followed her wherever she went, whispers from the winds, and the murmur of the earth beneath her feet. Everything had led to this moment, to the arrival of a child who was destined for greatness. But the birth of Pryderi was more than just the beginning of a new life. It was the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, one that spoke of a child born of the otherworld, a child who would change the fate of kingdoms and heal the broken lands. The stories of old spoke of a son who would bring peace, yet also stir conflict, a son who would be both a blessing and a curse. His future, already written in the stars, had been foretold by so many, and yet no one could say exactly how it would unfold. Before Pryderi was born, Rhiannon had been visited by omens, signs that filled her with a mixture of dread and wonder. It was said that a strange bird had flown overhead in the early mornings, its song echoing through the skies, marking the beginning of her pregnancy. Some said it was a bird from the otherworld, a creature with the power to bridge the gap between realms, and that it carried the spirit of prophecy. Others whispered that the bird was a messenger of the gods, warning of the change that would soon come to the land. At the time, Rhiannon had felt the weight of those signs, but nothing could have prepared her for what would come. The child she carried was not a simple infant, but the living manifestation of something ancient, an embodiment of magic and fate. He was born with eyes that glowed with the knowledge of the ages, as though he had seen the world long before his birth. His tiny hands, though soft, seemed to carry the strength of the mountains. And his voice, that first cry, echoed with the sounds of the earth and sky themselves. Rhiannon could feel it, the powers that surged through her son. His birth had been marked by strange circumstances, not the least of which was the silence that had fallen over the land the moment he entered the world. The usual sounds of animals in the woods, the rustling of leaves in the wind, all ceased. For just a moment, the world was still, as though the universe itself paused to witness the arrival of this child. The omens did not stop with his birth. It was said that when Pryderi was placed into his mother's arms, the sky above shifted, and a great light broke through the clouds, bathing the earth in an ethereal glow. It was a sign of something momentous, something that had been written in the stars long before the child was conceived. The people of the land, those who had witnessed the light in the sky, murmured of prophecies, of a child who would change everything. They spoke of a king, a ruler who would be both fierce and just, who would unite the lands and bring peace to the broken kingdoms. And yet, the prophecy was not without its shadow. There were darker whispers, too, of the cost of such a destiny, of the sacrifices that would be required to fulfill it. Pryderi was not only a child of promise, but a child of contradiction. He was both a hope and a warning, a symbol of the future and a reminder of the past. His birth was the beginning of a new chapter, but it was also the end of something else. The world that had existed before him could never be the same. His arrival had set in motion forces that none could truly understand. As Rhiannon held him close, she felt a rush of emotions, love, fear, hope, and dread. She had always known that the child she carried was destined for something greater, but now that he was here, she realized how little she knew of what lay ahead. His birth had been foreseen, but what would become of him? What role would he play in the vast, tangled web of fate that stretched across the lands? The prophecies surrounding Pryderi were not just about his greatness, they spoke of his struggle as well. The child was marked by both blessing and burden, and the world would not make it easy for him. There were whispers of enemies who would seek to use him for their own ends, of battles fought over his future, of the price he would have to pay to fulfill the prophecy. For every promise of peace, there was the shadow of conflict. For every vision of greatness, there was the possibility of tragedy. But Rhiannon did not see him as a mere tool of destiny. To her, he was simply her child, her flesh and blood. In his eyes, she saw a future full of potential, a life filled with love and joy. And yet, as much as she wanted to protect him from the harsh realities of the world, she knew she could not. He was destined to walk a path that would be both glorious and painful, and there was nothing she could do to change it. As the days passed and Pryderi grew, it became clear that he was no ordinary child. His mind was sharp, his presence commanding. Even at a young age, he seemed to understand things that were beyond the reach of most. It was as if the world itself had already begun to bend to his will. The omens that had surrounded his birth continued to follow him, weaving through his life like threads in a tapestry. Rhiannon's heart swelled with pride as she watched him grow, but with each passing day, the weight of the prophecy grew heavier. She knew that the child she loved so dearly was destined to change the world, but she also knew the dangers that came with such a fate. Pryderi's path would not be an easy one, and there would be times when even Rhiannon herself would question whether she had the strength to guide him through the trials ahead. And still, as the child of destiny took his first steps, the world whispered its secrets. The winds howled with the promise of greatness, and the earth trembled with the anticipation of the future. Pryderi had arrived, and the world would never be the same again. The birds were the first to notice. Their calls pierced the still morning air, shrill and frantic, as if warning of something terrible. Rhiannon stood at the edge of her chambers, her gaze fixed on the skies above. Her birds, those creatures that had always been her constant companions, circled in frantic flight, their wings beating faster than usual, their cries more urgent than ever. It was then that a cold fear settled deep in her heart. Pryderi was gone. The soft laughter of her child, the warmth of his small hand in hers, the gleam in his eyes, all of it vanished. In the space where he had been, there was only an eerie silence. Rhiannon's heart raced, and panic gripped her chest as she searched the rooms, calling his name in a voice that shook with fear. But there was no answer, only the distant cry of her birds. Desperation clawed at her. She ran through the halls, her feet echoing on the stone floors, the sound of her breath ragged and uneven. Every step brought her further into the madness of the moment, a moment when time itself seemed to stand still. The world outside her chambers had fallen away, leaving only the frantic beat of her heart and the gnawing ache of loss. Then, a whisper, a murmur that floated through the air like a forgotten memory. The birds know. The words lingered in the corners of her mind, and she stumbled, her hands reaching for the walls as she tried to steady herself. The birds, her loyal birds, had been present since the beginning. They had flown by her side, their songs filling the air with music. They had been a part of her life, a symbol of her connection to something greater, something beyond this world. But now, they were the harbingers of something far darker. A shadow passed over Rhiannon's face as she thought back. Her birds had always been part of the stories, of the magic that had shaped her, of the power that flowed through her veins. But now, it was as if they were part of something twisted, something wrong. How could they have led her to this moment, where her beloved son had disappeared? And yet, the evidence was clear, the birds were there when it happened. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her mind raced. The question gnawed at her, how had this happened? How had her son vanished without a trace, as if the earth had swallowed him whole? There were no answers, only the gnawing emptiness left by his absence. It wasn't long before others came, gathered by the panic that had spread like wildfire. The king, the elders, the wise women, all arrived at Rhiannon's door with grim expressions etched into their faces. And it didn't take long for the whispers to begin, voices that began to blame her. The birds, they said. It was her birds that had brought misfortune. They were the ones that had made Pryderi disappear, and by their wicked cry, they had summoned something evil. Rhiannon's heart shattered, not just because of the loss of her son, but because of the accusations that followed. The birds, her birds, were now seen as a curse, as instruments of destruction. And Rhiannon, the woman who had always been revered for her connection to the natural world, was now seen as the cause of the tragedy. Her heart broke with every word, every harsh glance thrown in her direction. They were all convinced that her magic had turned on her, that her very essence had betrayed her. The elders gathered, and their voices grew louder, more insistent. They spoke of dark magic, of curses placed upon the child, and of Rhiannon's unearthly connection to the birds. They said that she had used them, that she had called them to her side, and that now her power had turned against her. And so, Rhiannon, the mother who had loved and protected her son, was charged with a crime she hadn't committed. The very birds that had once been her companions were now seen as her betrayers, their cries marking her as a villain, a woman capable of casting dark spells upon the world. They spoke of punishment, of justice for the loss of Pryderi. They did not care that Rhiannon had never wished harm upon her son. All they saw was the impossible truth that her child had disappeared without a trace, and they needed someone to blame. She was bound, her wrists tight with ropes that dug into her skin. The weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders, suffocating her, making it hard to breathe. It was a punishment she did not deserve, for her heart ached with grief. She had lost her son, and now they were taking everything else from her, too. The world she had once known was shattering, piece by piece. The warmth of her child's touch, the sound of his laughter, the joy of seeing him grow, all gone. And now, they had stolen her dignity as well, making her the scapegoat for a crime she hadn't committed. Rhiannon tried to speak, tried to tell them the truth, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain the magic that had shaped her life, the bond she shared with the birds? How could she make them understand that she had never wanted harm to come to her son, that the birds had not been to blame? But the more she protested, the more the crowds turned against her. They were already convinced that she was guilty. And with each passing moment, the pain grew. The pain of losing Pryderi was unbearable, but the sting of being blamed for something she didn't do cut deeper than anything she had ever known. The truth was slipping away from her, drowned out by the cries of the birds and the murmurs of the people who could not, or would not, see the truth. And yet, even in the darkest of moments, Rhiannon did not give up. Even as she was punished, she held on to the hope that one day the truth would be revealed. She had to believe that somehow, some way, Pryderi would return. That the world would see the wrong that had been done to her, and that her name would be cleared. But until that day came, she would endure the unjust punishment, her spirit worn but unbroken. The birds may have been blamed, her magic may have turned against her, and the people may have condemned her, but Rhiannon knew in her heart that her love for her son had never wavered. The crowd's eyes were cold as they gathered, their faces set in hard, judgmental lines. The air was thick with whispers, the tension so thick it felt as though it might choke her. Rhiannon stood before them, her hands bound in rough ropes that bit into her skin. Her once proud figure was now slumped, a shadow of the woman who had ridden through the skies with grace, who had been loved and admired. Now, she was nothing more than a criminal, a woman accused of a crime she had not committed. Her heart ached as she felt their eyes upon her, eyes filled with suspicion, with disdain. She had always been a symbol of beauty and strength, a connection to something greater, something beyond the reach of ordinary people. But now, she was nothing but a woman being led to her trial, her soul laid bare for the world to judge. There was no sympathy for her. No understanding of her grief. They saw only the loss of Pryderi and the mystery of his disappearance. And in their fear, they needed a culprit. They needed to point their fingers, to cast blame, to hold someone responsible. The answer, they decided, was simple: Rhiannon. Her birds, her magic, her power, everything that had once made her beloved now turned against her in their eyes. The trial began with a single word, spoken by one of the elders. Guilty. There was no evidence, no proof that Rhiannon had done anything wrong. There was only the fear, the desperation to make sense of an unspeakable tragedy. But the people's judgment was already sealed. Her birds, once companions, now symbolized her guilt. She had used them, they said. She had called upon them to bring about misfortune. They had seen her magic and had seen the danger that it posed. And so, they turned against her. In their eyes, she was a threat. Rhiannon's heart broke as the words were spoken, but she held her head high, refusing to show the pain that tore through her. She knew the truth. She knew that the birds, the magic, none of it had been used to harm her son. Yet here she stood, accused of a crime that had never been hers to commit. But in the world of myths, where fate and destiny weave the lives of mortals, truth was often harder to find than the stories that people told. The punishment they gave her was a cruel mockery of the woman she had once been. It was not just the physical chains that bound her, but the shame they placed upon her soul. They made her serve them, made her walk the streets like a common servant, her dignity stripped away. No longer would she ride in the saddle of a noble steed. No longer would she stand tall and proud, her eyes filled with wisdom and strength. Instead, she was reduced to a mere figure of ridicule, a spectacle for all to see. Every day, she worked under the harsh gaze of the people. Her once graceful hands, which had once known only beauty, now toiled in the dirt. The king's palace, once a place of grandeur, now became her prison. The servants and guards who had once respected her, now watched her with pity, some with disgust. They all knew she had been accused of killing her own child. The accusation alone was enough to poison any thought of kindness. And Rhiannon, despite the pain that churned in her chest, bore it all in silence. The public perception of her guilt became her reality. No one spoke of the possibility of her innocence. No one cared to listen to her explanations, her desperate cries for justice. The trial had already decided her fate, and it was a fate she had to face with no reprieve. As the days passed, Rhiannon's strength began to wither. She was no longer the powerful woman who had once commanded the loyalty of kings and creatures alike. Her heart, which had once burned with a fierce fire, now felt hollow, her spirit battered by the weight of the world's cruelty. Yet, even in the darkest moments, she did not break. She would not let them take everything from her. They could strip away her dignity, her power, her joy, but they could not take her love for her son. And as she moved through the streets, bound and humiliated, the people who had once adored her now turned away. Their faces were unreadable, but she could feel their eyes on her, full of judgment and suspicion. The birds, who had once been a symbol of her grace, now followed her with mocking cries, their voices piercing the silence, a cruel reminder of the accusations that had turned the world against her. But there was something in the way the birds moved, something that Rhiannon could not ignore. Their calls were not just cries of mockery, they carried a message that spoke to her through the rustling of their wings, the flapping of their feathers. She had always known that the birds held power, that they were more than just simple creatures. They were messengers of something greater, something beyond the mortal realm. But now, as they flew in circles above her, she felt something stirring within them. They were trying to tell her something that would help her prove her innocence. The trial had been unfair, and the punishment unjust, but Rhiannon refused to let it define her. She would not let the world believe the lie. There was justice in Welsh mythology, a justice that was rooted in truth, in honor, and in the natural order of things. And Rhiannon knew that the truth would eventually come to light. She had to hold on to that hope, to that belief, even in the face of her suffering. For Rhiannon, the pain of her punishment was not just physical. It was the emotional weight of being misunderstood, of being cast aside by the very people she had once called her own. It was the heartbreak of seeing her son's name sullied by lies. And yet, deep within her, there was a flicker of something more. Something that told her that no matter how long it took, the truth would shine through the darkness. Justice, in the world of Welsh myth, was not always swift. But it was sure. And Rhiannon knew that one day, the real story would be told. Her name would be cleared. Her son would be returned to her. And when that day came, the world would remember the woman who had endured the unthinkable and had never lost faith in the truth. The birds never stopped singing. Their cries were not just calls, but whispers of something ancient, something woven into the very fabric of fate. Rhiannon could feel the vibrations of their song deep in her chest, the rhythm haunting and steady, like a pulse that beat through the earth and sky alike. The melody was not one of joy but of sorrow, heavy with mourning, yet there was something more. A prophecy hidden beneath each note, a message that only those who could truly listen would understand. It had been days, weeks even, since Pryderi had vanished, and still the birds circled her, watching from the sky, never straying far from her presence. Rhiannon had tried to call them away, to free herself from their constant vigil, but the birds remained. They were part of her, bound to her in ways that neither she nor the world fully understood. To her, they were a constant reminder of the past, of all she had lost, and all she still had to endure. Their song, however, was not merely a mournful cry for her lost child. There was something deeper in the melody, something that spoke of an inevitable fate. She could feel it, as if the very air around her was alive with whispers, the birds' voices threading through the silence like a winding path leading toward a distant truth. Every note held the promise of something to come, a glimpse of a future that was yet to unfold. The birds sang of what was lost, but also of what was destined to be found. Rhiannon could not escape their song, nor could she ignore the pull of the prophecy that it carried. They were not just any birds. These creatures were tied to the very essence of her being. Her connection to them was a bond not just of love, but of magic, a magic that went beyond the world of men, touching the divine, the otherworldly. And through that connection, Rhiannon could feel the weight of the prophecy pressing down on her, urging her to listen, to understand what the birds were trying to say. She knew they were harbingers of fate, carrying messages from beyond the veil, from the unseen forces that shaped the lives of mortals. In the quiet moments, when the birds' calls were not so loud, Rhiannon could hear the echoes of another voice, a voice like hers, yet ancient and powerful. It was a voice that spoke to her in the rustling of wings and the shifting of shadows, a voice that carried the weight of a goddess's power. Morrigan, the goddess of fate, war, and death, whose own birds soared through the skies, seemed to watch over Rhiannon, guiding her in ways the mortal world could not comprehend. The connection between Rhiannon and Morrigan was not obvious to the world, but it was undeniable. Both were women of power, tied to the forces of life and death, creation and destruction. Rhiannon's birds, like those of Morrigan, were symbols of fate. They were creatures that bridged the worlds of the living and the dead, messengers that carried the will of the gods to those who were willing to listen. Rhiannon had never known the full extent of this connection, but now, as she stood in the ruins of her life, it became clearer than ever. The bird song seemed to answer the questions that Rhiannon dared not ask aloud. Where was Pryderi? Why had he disappeared? The melody of their cries wrapped around her like a veil, holding her in its grasp. It was a song of loss, yes, but it was also a song of return, of the turning of the wheel. There was something sacred in the way the birds moved, something that whispered of an order beyond her understanding. They were not just creatures of the earth, they were part of something much bigger. They were part of the pattern, the weaving of fate that connected all things. Her mind would sometimes drift to memories of her youth, to the stories she had heard of Morrigan's birds, the shapeshifters that flew over battlefields, calling the dead to them, deciding who would live and who would die. Rhiannon had never seen herself as a part of such darkness. But the more she reflected on it, the more she saw the parallels. Her own life had been shaped by fate in ways she had not fully understood. She had been brought low, cast out, and blamed for something she had not done. And yet, like the birds that circled her, there was something in her that would rise again. The bird's song reflected her pain, but it also reflected hope. It was a melody that twisted through her soul, threading its way through her grief and guilt, telling her that she was not lost. The birds had not come to torment her, they had come to remind her of who she was, of what she had been. They had come to show her the power that still flowed through her, a power she had almost forgotten. The goddess Morrigan was never far from her thoughts now, her presence felt in the very air, and the rustling of the birds' wings. The birds were harbingers of fate, yes. But they were also guides, showing Rhiannon a path she had been too blinded by grief to see. The prophecy that they carried was not one of doom, but of renewal. In their song, there was a promise that things would change. The world would right itself, the wrongs would be undone, and Pryderi would return to her. But not without a cost. There was always a price to be paid, and Rhiannon could feel it, the weight of that price hanging in the air like an invisible burden. And so, as the birds sang, their voices rising and falling like the tides, Rhiannon listened. She listened not just with her ears, but with her heart, with her soul. The prophecy was not a simple thing, not a neat little story to be told. It was a tapestry, woven of light and shadow, of joy and sorrow. It was a story that spoke of death, but also of life, of endings, but also of beginnings. Her connection to Morrigan was not one of choice, but of destiny. It was in her blood, in her bones. The goddess's power, her ancient wisdom, had always been a part of Rhiannon's fate, even when she had not known it. Now, in the darkest moments of her life, Rhiannon could hear the birds calling her forward, telling her that the prophecy was not over, that her story was not finished. The bird song would continue, carrying with it the weight of fate. And as long as Rhiannon could hear it, she would know that there was still a chance for redemption, for return. She was not yet lost. The song of the birds was the song of life itself, dark and mysterious, but full of promise for those who dared to listen. The moment Rhiannon heard the unmistakable sound of hooves approaching, her heart stopped in her chest. It was a sound she had not dared to hope for in so long, a sound she thought she had lost forever. The horses were coming. But not just any horses, her son's horses. For so long, she had lived in the shadows of grief, walking in the heavy silence of a world without her child. The memory of his laughter, his touch, had faded like a dream upon waking. But now, the sound of hooves, the sound that had once signaled his presence, brought with it a rush of memories, so vivid they almost burned. There was no mistaking it now, her son was returning. The birds overhead seemed to recognize it before she did, their song rising in a crescendo, a chorus of joy mixed with something deeper. Rhiannon had always felt their pull, the ancient connection between her and the creatures that had followed her for so long. They circled above her now, their wings beating in time with her pulse. They had waited for this moment, just as she had. And then, as the riders came into view, she saw him. Pryderi. Her son. He rode with the grace of someone who had never left, his face unchanged, his eyes bright with a fire that could only come from returning to the ones he loved. Rhiannon stood frozen, unable to move, her breath caught in her throat. Her son, her precious, lost child, was back. The punishment, the sorrow, the endless days of silence and suffering, all of it seemed to fall away in an instant. When he saw her, his face broke into a smile that could light the darkest night. He dismounted swiftly, his strong arms reaching for her, and in that moment, it was as if no time had passed. No punishment had been dealt. No lies had been spoken. She was no longer the servant, the woman who had been forced to wear the weight of shame. She was his mother once more, and that bond, that love, could not be broken. She held him in her arms, the weight of him a comfort, a reminder of everything she had suffered to bring him into the world. His presence brought a sense of peace she had not known in so long, but it also stirred something else in her, something deeper. His return was not just the end of a mother's grief, it was the beginning of something new. It was rebirth, in the truest sense. The air around them felt charged with something ancient, as if the very earth beneath their feet was holding its breath. The birds, still circling above them, seemed to be a part of the ritual, the ceremony of his return. Their song had changed, no longer the mournful cries of loss, but a song of celebration, of victory. It was as if the birds knew the significance of this moment, of what Pryderi's return truly meant. Rhiannon pulled back slightly to look at him, her hands trembling as she cupped his face, her eyes searching for any trace of the boy who had been taken from her. But the man standing before her was no longer the child she had once held in her arms. He had grown, matured in ways she could not fully understand. Yet, beneath the man he had become, she saw the spark of the boy she had lost. "I've missed you, my son," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you too, mother," he replied, his voice steady but filled with a sadness she couldn't ignore. The pain of his disappearance lingered between them, but it was a pain that could finally begin to heal. He was home. That was enough. As the birds circled above them, Rhiannon could feel their power, the magic they carried, swirling around her like a breeze that was both cool and warm. It was as if they were acknowledging the moment, their song now a soft, lilting refrain that seemed to surround them both. And with every beat of their wings, Rhiannon felt the bond between her and the birds grow stronger, deeper. They were more than just companions now, they were a part of the miracle that had returned her son to her. Her heart swelled with emotion as she realized the depth of the bird's role in all of this. They had not only been the messengers of fate, they had been the agents of his return. Their song had carried him back to her, guiding him through the invisible threads that bound him to her, to his destiny. The birds had been watching over him, even in his absence, leading him back to the place where he belonged. In that moment, Rhiannon understood that her birds were not just creatures of sorrow and prophecy, they were agents of transformation. They had seen the past, the present, and the future, and now they were the keepers of a new chapter in her life. They had sung of mourning, yes, but they also sung of renewal, of hope. And Pryderi's return was the manifestation of that hope, the fulfillment of the prophecy the birds had whispered all along. As the sun began to set, casting a soft golden light over the land, Rhiannon and Pryderi stood together, the birds overhead still singing their song, now a harmonious blend of joy and peace. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the final chapter of their story to unfold. Rhiannon's punishment, the years of sorrow, the endless trials, all of it had led to this moment, this beautiful reunion. But it wasn't just about her. It was about Pryderi, about his rebirth. The boy who had been lost was now found, and the promise of a new life, a new beginning, filled the air between them. Her birds circled closer, their wings beating in time with the beat of her heart. They had done their part. Now, it was time for the mother and son to begin anew. Their love was stronger than ever, their bond unbroken by time or fate. And as the birds flew overhead, Rhiannon felt the weight of the past lift from her shoulders, replaced by the warmth of a future that was just beginning. As the years passed, Rhiannon's presence began to shift. No longer the distant, untouchable goddess of legend, she stood before her people as something more tangible, more real. The grandeur of her divine origins still clung to her, but it had been tempered by the passage of time, by her human experiences, by the moments of joy and sorrow that made her both untouchable and deeply, achingly human. Rhiannon had always been a symbol of power, of grace, of mystery. Yet, there was something about her transformation that made her even more formidable, even more captivating. She was a queen, yes, but she was also a mother, a woman who had endured the unimaginable loss and found a way to heal. This duality, this blend of the divine and the human, made her a figure of extraordinary depth, someone whose strength came not from her celestial heritage, but from the love she had for her son, for her people, and for the land she ruled. Her hands, once so delicate, now showed the marks of time. Her skin had softened, her eyes deeper, reflecting the wisdom that only comes from living through both triumph and heartache. And yet, there was still something otherworldly about her, an ethereal quality that never truly faded. It was as if, in her very being, she held the tension between the heavens and the earth, a bridge between the divine and the mortal. It was the love for her son, though, that had solidified her power in a way nothing else could. Pryderi's return had unlocked a new layer of strength in her, something far beyond the ethereal powers she had once wielded. Now, she was both queen and mother, protector, nurturer, and ruler. The strength of her motherhood had intertwined with her royalty, making her a figure that no one dared to cross. The transformation was clear. She had gone from a goddess who could command the winds to a woman whose love for her child was her true power. Her love was the force that moved mountains, that turned the impossible into reality. But it was not just her role as a mother that had shaped her. Her place as a queen had molded her too. Rhiannon had been a leader before, but her trials had made her more than that. She had suffered, she had been humbled, she had faced the darkest of days. The punishment, the shame, the loss of her son, all had chipped away at the divine facade and left behind a woman who understood the true weight of leadership. Her wisdom had been earned through sacrifice, through tears, through waiting. In the quiet moments, when she stood alone in the gardens of her palace, Rhiannon often found herself reflecting on what it meant to be both divine and human. She had once worn the mantle of a goddess as easily as a crown, but now, that crown was something far heavier. Her people saw her as a queen to be revered, yes, but she was also one of them. She had tasted the bitterness of life, the struggles of the flesh. She knew what it meant to lose, to fight, to endure. Her people understood this. They didn't just see her as a figurehead, they saw her as a leader who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. The balance between the divine and the human was delicate, but it was what gave Rhiannon her true power. She was no longer a figure to be placed on a pedestal, unreachable and untouchable. She was now a woman whose heart beat with the rhythms of the world around her. But in her chest, in that heart, still lived the echoes of her divine nature. When she spoke, her voice held a certain weight, a resonance that seemed to echo through the very air. The land responded to her, the people listened to her, and the birds that had followed her for so long still soared above her, their wings a reminder of the magic that lay within her soul. Her transformation had brought with it a new understanding of leadership. The strength of a queen lay not in her ability to command, but in her willingness to serve. Rhiannon had proven that time and time again. As a mother, she had sacrificed everything for her son, and as a queen, she had sacrificed for her people. She had become a symbol not just of power, but of grace under pressure, of resilience in the face of adversity. There were days when Rhiannon would stand in front of her people, her heart swelling with pride as she looked at all she had built, her family, her kingdom, her legacy. But there were also moments when the weight of it all seemed unbearable. She would retreat to the solitude of her chambers, her thoughts heavy with the choices she had made. Could she ever truly balance the divine and the human? Could she ever fully embrace both parts of herself without losing something essential? And yet, every time she looked at Pryderi, her son, the one who had returned to her after so long, she found the answer. She saw in his eyes the reflection of the woman she had become. A mother, yes, but also a queen. And in that reflection, she saw the beauty of the balance she had found between the divine and the human. She had become something neither of those things could have created on their own. She was both, and she was more than both. Her birds, always present, flew above her, their wings a testament to the magic that still lived within her. She had been reborn, not in the way some gods might, but in a way that was far more powerful, through her love, through her trials, through her sacrifice. And in that rebirth, she had become something no one could take away, a woman of strength, a queen who ruled with wisdom, and a mother whose love knew no bounds. The transformation of Rhiannon was not just a shift in power or status, it was a change that affected the very fabric of her being. She had shed the skin of the distant goddess and become something real, something human. But she had done it without losing the magic that made her who she was. Her divine nature was still there, just beneath the surface, pulsing with the strength of a heart that had loved and lost, and loved again. And in that love, in that power, Rhiannon had found her true self, both human and divine, a queen for the ages. In the heart of Dyfed, where the hills rise and fall like the gentle rhythms of a song, Rhiannon's court was both a place of power and a quiet sanctuary. Here, beneath the open sky that stretched above, decisions were made that would shape the future of the kingdom. The air around the court always seemed to hum, like the soft sound of wings in the distance, a reminder that Rhiannon was never truly alone. The birds that circled high above were her constant companions, and in their songs, they carried the weight of her reign. Rhiannon had proven herself to be more than just a figurehead, she was the very heart of Dyfed. Her voice was soft but commanding, her presence a quiet force that shaped the lives of all who lived within the kingdom. As queen, she wielded not only the power of her title but the respect earned through sacrifice, wisdom, and the strength of her love. Her reign was a reflection of the land itself, rich, fertile, and full of promise, but also vulnerable, always at the mercy of forces beyond its control. At the court of Dyfed, every gesture mattered. The relationships that Rhiannon built with those around her were the threads that wove the kingdom together. One of the most significant of these bonds was with Mabinogi, her companion and confidant. Their connection ran deeper than mere political alliance. There was a trust between them that transcended words, a shared understanding of the sacrifices each had made. Mabinogi, always calm and measured, balanced Rhiannon's strength with his wisdom. He understood the weight she carried, and in return, she relied on him. His counsel was invaluable, his loyalty unquestionable. In the quiet moments, when the court was still, their eyes would meet, and a silent communication passed between them, both knowing how much had been lost, and how much there was yet to gain. Yet, the kingdom of Dyft was not just ruled by the hand of its queen. It was influenced by the very creatures that surrounded it. The birds that Rhiannon had once ridden within her goddess form now seemed to echo her rule in a more subtle, powerful way. They soared across the sky, their calls ringing out like the whispers of fate itself. Some believed the birds carried omens, warnings of both good and ill to come. Others saw in them the very essence of Rhiannon's rule, a symbol of the strength and grace that she brought to Dyft. They were always there, watching over the kingdom, their songs both a blessing and a reminder that Rhiannon's power was as much a gift as it was a responsibility. In the court of Dyft, nothing was ever simple. Politics were always at play, but Rhiannon's wisdom was a quiet force that kept the kingdom steady. She was not just a ruler in the traditional sense, but a mother to her people. She listened to their concerns, she knew their struggles, and she offered guidance not with commands, but with understanding. Her people looked to her not just because of her title, but because they knew she had faced the same trials, the same heartbreak, and had emerged stronger for it. Rhiannon's humanity was what made her reign so powerful. She was one with her kingdom, not above it. But even with her wisdom and grace, there were challenges. Every ruler must contend with opposition, and in Dyft, that opposition sometimes came in the form of jealousy or distrust. Not everyone believed Rhiannon had earned her crown, or that her rule could be as strong as those who came before her. The whispers that circled in the shadows spoke of doubt, but Rhiannon did not flinch. She knew her worth. She had faced accusations that could have destroyed her, and yet here she was, still standing, still ruling. The trials she had faced had tempered her like steel in the fire, making her unbreakable. Mabinogi, ever loyal, had seen this strength in her. He was the one who stood by her side, offering support when the weight of the crown seemed too heavy. Together, they held Dyft together, through the seasons, through the trials, and through the quiet moments where everything seemed to hang in the balance. Rhiannon's court was not just a place of politics, it was a reflection of her very nature. It was a place where strength and compassion were not mutually exclusive. It was where decisions were made not by force, but through understanding. It was a place where every bird in the sky seemed to carry the message that Rhiannon's reign was more than just a passing moment in history, it was a legacy, a connection between the past, present, and future. Her birds carried not just her name, but the essence of her kingdom. They were the messengers of her power, her love, and her wisdom. Rhiannon's influence stretched beyond the walls of the court. Her reputation had spread far and wide, and even those who had once doubted her came to respect the queen who had risen from the ashes of her own grief. She was not just a ruler, she was a symbol of endurance, of the strength that comes from knowing who you are, and from loving with all your heart. Those who stood with her knew that her power was not born from fear, but from her ability to inspire trust, to heal wounds, and to bring hope where it had once been lost. And in the quiet moments, when the court was still and the birds sang their mournful songs in the distance, Rhiannon would look to the horizon and know that she had become something more than she had ever imagined. She was not just a queen or a mother, she was a beacon of resilience, a ruler whose influence was felt in every breath of the wind and in every song of the birds that soared above Dyft. Her reign, like the birds she had once commanded, would continue to echo through the kingdom for generations to come. The moment Rhiannon's birds spread their wings, the world seemed to pause. Their call echoed through the valley like a chant, not of this world, but from somewhere deeper, ancient, sacred. They were not just birds, they were messengers, harbingers of both joy and sorrow. When they flew overhead, their presence was felt by every living thing, stirring the air, the heart, the soul. Their song held a magic that was impossible to ignore, a magic that tied them to something far older than the land of Dyft, something that stretched across time, across generations. These birds were not ordinary creatures. Their feathers glistened like the stars, their eyes held secrets too profound for mere mortals, and their songs were woven with the power of fate itself. In Celtic lore, birds were revered as sacred beings, carrying messages from the gods, but Rhiannon's birds were different. They were her companions, her guides, and her emissaries, bridging the gap between the human world and the divine. The connection between Rhiannon and her birds was not simply one of queen and creature, it was an ancient bond that stretched back to the heart of the earth itself. The birds were her allies in the fight against fate's cruelty. They were witnesses to her pain and her triumphs, symbols of her undying will. But there was something else about them, a deeper meaning. They were also symbols of transformation, of the shifting winds of life, constantly changing yet always constant in their beauty and power. In the Celtic world, birds were closely linked to wisdom, and Rhiannon's birds were no exception. They were creatures that spoke not just through their songs, but through the silence that followed. Their presence was a reminder that wisdom was often found not in words, but in the spaces between them. In Rhiannon's birds, there was an ancient knowledge, a knowing that spoke of cycles and rebirth, of life and death, of the inevitability of change. But it wasn't just wisdom that Rhiannon's birds embodied. They were also symbols of the soul itself. The soul, in Celtic mythology, was often seen as something that could take flight, just like a bird, and soar to realms beyond the reach of the living. The birds were a link between the worlds, and through them, Rhiannon's spirit was forever tied to something greater than herself. They were her connection to the divine, to the ancestral gods, to the earth and sky that surrounded her. They carried her essence, and in return, she offered them her devotion, a devotion born from a deep understanding of their power. It was said that the birds carried the soul of Rhiannon with them wherever they went. When they sang, it was as if they were singing for the souls of the lost, the forgotten, the wounded. But they also sang of hope, of transformation, of renewal. The bird's song was not just a melody, it was a prayer, a blessing, a curse, all woven into one. In their voices, Rhiannon's story was told, of love and loss, of betrayal and redemption. The bird's flight across the sky was the story of her life, her highs and her lows, her moments of pure joy and her moments of deepest despair. The magic of the birds was tied to the ancient Celtic deities who watched over the land. They were creatures of the otherworld, born of the very essence of nature's power. Their flight through the skies was a reminder of the presence of the gods, watching over Rhiannon and her people, guiding their fates. They were the eyes of the divine, the ears of the earth, carrying messages that could not be spoken in human tongues. The gods did not always speak directly to mortals, but their words were in the bird's song. Every flutter of their wings was an echo of divine will, every call a reminder that Rhiannon's fate was interwoven with something far greater than any human could comprehend. It was no coincidence that Rhiannon's birds were often associated with the Morrigan, the ancient goddess of fate, war, and death. The Morrigan, with her fierce power and mysterious ways, was known to take the shape of a crow or raven, creatures whose calls forewarned of death and change. Rhiannon's birds, though not as dark as the Morrigan's, carried with them a similar aura of transformation. They were not just birds of beauty, but birds of power, of significance. They carried the weight of prophecy, and their songs were often heard in moments of great change, when the world was shifting and fate was about to make a turn. The bird's song was more than just a melody, it was a prophecy, a sign of what was to come. Their notes echoed the shifting tides of fate, speaking of transformations yet to unfold. Each note was a whisper of what was to happen, each trill a promise that the future would unfold as it should. And yet, their song was also a lament, a mourning of things lost, of moments past. The birds were not just creatures of joy, but creatures of sorrow too, carrying the weight of both life and death, of beginnings and endings. As Rhiannon's power grew, so did the influence of her birds. They were her messengers, her witnesses, her silent companions. And through them, she could hear the whispers of the gods, the murmurs of fate, the breath of the earth itself. They were the embodiment of all that she had endured, her trials, her pain, her triumphs. And in their song, there was always a reminder of the balance of life, of the beauty and the cost, of the joy and the sorrow, of the love and the loss. The birds were the key to Rhiannon's power, the lifeblood of her reign. Through them, she could see the world as it was, as it could be, and as it would become. They were her eyes when she could not see, her voice when she could not speak. And in their song, she found her truth. They were more than just birds, they were the souls of the land, the echoes of the divine, and the reflections of Rhiannon herself. The air grows still, and the world seems to hold its breath. In the silence, there is a presence, something ancient, something eternal. The birds take flight, their wings beating with the rhythm of the earth, and as they soar into the sky, their song seems to bridge two worlds, the world of the living and the world of the dead. Rhiannon stands, watching them, knowing their flight is not just an act of nature but a sacred journey, a passage between the realms. In the shadows of Welsh mythology, the underworld is not a place of darkness or fear, but a realm where life and death are intertwined. It is a place of transformation, where the soul takes its final flight. And Rhiannon, with her birds, holds the key to this mysterious realm. Her connection to the underworld runs deep, for she is not just a queen of the living but a queen who walks between worlds, a guide for those who are lost and a protector for those who are yet to come. The birds that circle Rhiannon are not simply messengers of the earth, they are the emissaries of the gods, carrying with them the souls of the departed. When one of her birds sings, it is not just a sound carried on the wind. It is a call to the spirits, a song that echoes through the veil between life and death. These birds are more than just creatures of flesh and bone, they are the breath of the afterlife itself, speaking in the language of those who have crossed over and those who remain behind. In Welsh belief, death was not an end but a passage. The afterlife was not a cold, lifeless place but a continuation of the journey, a realm where souls lived on, transformed and renewed. The underworld was a land of endless cycles, where the spirits of the dead were not lost, but were reborn in new forms, either as part of the earth, the sky, or the creatures that roamed it. Rhiannon's birds, therefore, were not only symbols of fate and wisdom, but also of death's inevitability and its role in the cycle of life. They carried with them the souls of those who had passed, guiding them to their final resting place, where they would find peace, transformation, and rebirth. The connection between Rhiannon and the underworld is one that transcends the mortal realm. She is a goddess, yes, but she is also a protector of the souls who travel through the afterlife. Her birds are the vessels of that protection, their wings carrying the weight of the departed as they move through the space between life and death. And yet, as much as the birds are tied to the dead, they are also symbols of hope, for they remind the living that death is not the end. In their song, there is the promise of a new beginning, of life renewed. They are the heralds of change, of the cycles that govern the world, reminding all who listen that death is but one step in the journey of the soul. In Rhiannon's story, the birds' role as messengers between the worlds is crucial. They are the link that binds the living to the dead, a reminder that the boundary between life and death is not as clear-cut as it seems. The birds do not just carry messages of sorrow or loss, they carry messages of wisdom, of understanding, and of peace. Their song is a blessing, an offering to the spirits of the departed, guiding them through the darkness and into the light of transformation. Through them, Rhiannon communicates with the souls of the dead, ensuring their safe passage into the afterlife. They are her eyes and ears, her connection to a world beyond mortal understanding. But Rhiannon's relationship with the underworld is not one of separation or isolation. She is a bridge between the two realms, a figure who moves freely between them, not bound by the constraints of life or death. She is both mother and queen, divine and human, a figure who holds the power to heal and to harm, to protect and to guide. Her birds, then, are more than mere symbols, they are extensions of her will, each flutter of their wings a reflection of her power. They carry the wisdom of the ages, the knowledge of the gods, and the understanding of the cycle of life and death. The Welsh view of the afterlife reflects this belief in transformation. It was not a place of punishment or darkness, but a realm of renewal. Souls were believed to move through the underworld, shedding their old forms and emerging again, reborn. The journey of the soul was an ongoing process, a never-ending cycle of change. And in Rhiannon's story, this belief is brought to life in the flight of her birds. Their song, their flight, their very presence is a reminder that death is not an end, but a continuation into something greater, something eternal. Rhiannon's role as the keeper of souls is not just about guiding the dead to their final resting place. It is also about ensuring that the living understand the importance of their own transformation. Her birds, as they flutter between worlds, remind the living of the power of change, of the need to embrace the cycles of life and death. They are a symbol of the endless journey, a reminder that the soul is always moving, always evolving, always growing. In Welsh mythology, death is not feared but embraced as a natural part of life. The dead are not to be mourned forever, but celebrated for their journey. And Rhiannon's birds carry this message with them, their song echoing through the heavens as they bring the spirits of the departed to their final resting place. As they soar above, they remind us all that we are part of a greater cycle, that our lives are intertwined with those who have come before us and those who will come after. And as Rhiannon stands beneath the sky, watching her birds take flight, she knows that their song will continue long after she is gone, that their wings will carry her soul, and the souls of all who walk between the worlds. In their song, there is peace, there is comfort, and there is hope, a hope that even in the darkest of times, even in the face of death, there is always the promise of transformation, rebirth, and renewal. Through her birds, Rhiannon reminds us that death is not something to fear, but something to honor, for it is the passage through which we all must pass to become something more. Rhiannon's story is one of contradictions and complexities, beauty and sorrow, strength and vulnerability. At the heart of her relationships lies a deep current of power, independence, and mystery. She is not a woman defined solely by the men in her life, but their connections to her shape her story in profound ways. Among these men is Pool, her husband, and their relationship stands as a testament to love, loyalty, and the intricate webs of power that govern Welsh mythology. Their first meeting is the stuff of legend. Pool, a mortal king, is captivated by Rhiannon's otherworldly beauty, drawn to her grace and dignity. She, however, is not easily won. Her autonomy is clear from the beginning, a subtle reminder that while she may be an object of desire, she is no one's possession. When Pool first seeks to marry her, Rhiannon offers him a challenge, one of wit and skill that will prove his worth. This is not the passive submission expected of women in the typical stories of love and romance. Instead, Rhiannon asserts her power, shaping her own fate and insisting that her love must be earned. Even in their courtship, Rhiannon is no meek maiden waiting to be swept off her feet. She holds the reins of her destiny, and yet she does not seek to punish or reject Pool, but rather to engage with him on an equal footing. There is a quiet intensity in their relationship, a recognition that love is not just about passion, but about respect, choice, and shared strength. Pool proves himself worthy, and Rhiannon, ever the queen of both earthly and mystical realms, accepts him into her life. But even in this union, nothing is simple. The power dynamics between them are ever present. Rhiannon's strength as a woman and a goddess is undeniable, and Pool, while noble, must learn to navigate her autonomy. Their marriage is one of mutual respect, but it is also a constant dance of power, of balance, where both must hold their ground, but also give way when necessary. This delicate equilibrium reflects a larger truth of Welsh mythology, that love is not always easy or one-sided. It is complex, layered, and often tinged with sacrifice and compromise. As a mother, Rhiannon's relationship with Pool is tested further. Her son, Pryderi, is born under mysterious and tragic circumstances, and this moment of joy quickly becomes overshadowed by the loss and confusion that follows. Rhiannon's strength is once again called into question as she faces the accusations of a crime she did not commit, one that strains her relationship with her husband. Pool, despite his love for her, is caught between his loyalty to his queen and his trust in the judgments of others. This rift in their relationship shows that even the strongest love can falter in the face of deceit and loss. Yet, Rhiannon's story is not solely about the love between her and Pool. Her relationships with other figures also reveal the complexities of her character. Mabinogi, a close companion to the family, becomes another figure in Rhiannon's life, both as an ally and as someone who recognizes her strength and wisdom. Their bond is marked not just by loyalty, but by a recognition of the deep forces at play in the world around them. Mabinogi, in his own way, sees the power Rhiannon holds, not just in her magical connection to the birds and the other world, but in her quiet, unyielding spirit. And yet, Rhiannon's relationships are not solely bound by love, duty, or power. There is an undercurrent of loneliness in her story, a sense that even though she is surrounded by those who admire and care for her, there are few who truly understand her. The weight of her autonomy, the very thing that makes her a strong, independent figure, also sets her apart. She is a woman who walks the line between the mortal world and the divine, between the seen and the unseen, and this duality keeps her isolated, even from those she holds most dear. In Welsh mythology, love is rarely straightforward. It is full of twists and turns, challenges and sacrifices. Rhiannon's relationships mirror this complexity. With Poole, her love is marked by moments of joy and heartache, loyalty and suspicion. She does not surrender herself fully to him, nor does she demand complete control. Instead, their love is an exchange, a balance of give and take. It is a relationship that survives not because of submission, but because of mutual respect for each other's strengths and flaws. Rhiannon's relationships also serve as a reflection of her autonomy. She is not a woman to be defined by the roles that society or myth might impose upon her. Her role as a mother, wife, and queen is shaped by her choices, not by external expectations. She is neither the passive wife nor the overbearing matriarch. She is both, and neither, navigating the complexities of each role with wisdom and grace. Her power does not diminish in her love for Poole, nor does it falter in her loyalty to him. It is simply different from the conventional power structures seen in other tales. Rhiannon's love is not something that can be easily contained or defined. It is wild, untamed, and free, like the birds that are forever bound to her. Her relationships with the men in her life, Poole, Mabinogi, and others, are all deeply intertwined with her own identity, her own sense of self. They are not just characters in her story, but reflections of the many aspects of who she is. Her autonomy as a woman, a goddess, and a queen is a thread that runs through each of these relationships, grounding them in both love and power. Through Rhiannon, we see that love is not simply a force that binds us to others. It is also a force that frees us to be who we truly are. It is a strength that allows us to stand tall, to navigate the complexities of our relationships, and to shape our own destinies. In her relationships, Rhiannon does not lose herself, she becomes more fully herself, embracing both her divine and human aspects. She teaches us that love is not about domination or submission, but about balance, respect, and the freedom to be who we are, no matter the cost. Poole, the noble king, and Rhiannon, the goddess of strength and mystery, stand as one of the most intriguing and complicated couples in Welsh mythology. From the moment their paths cross, their bond is marked by trials that would test the core of their characters. Together, they navigate a world where power, wisdom, and loyalty are constantly in motion, and the weight of their shared experiences forges a connection unlike any other. Their union begins with a challenge, a subtle test that sets the tone for the rest of their relationship. Rhiannon, ever the queen of both earthly and mystical realms, requires Poole to prove his worthiness. She doesn't simply hand over her affection, instead, she demands respect and recognition of her power. Theirs is not a relationship defined by simple love or beauty. It is a bond built on mutual respect, each understanding the other's strength and complexity. Poole's journey to win Rhiannon is not just about love, it is about earning the right to stand beside her. As their lives intertwine, the couple faces trials that would strain even the strongest of unions. Rhiannon's mysterious punishment, an unjust accusation that separates her from Poole and their newborn son, tests the depth of their commitment. The wrongful blame cast upon her is a cruel twist of fate, one that strips Rhiannon of her dignity and forces Poole to make a decision that will forever shape his reign. It is in this moment, when the world seems to turn against them, that we see the true nature of their bond. Poole's choice to stand by Rhiannon, to defy the judgment of others, is a moment of profound loyalty. It is not just about love, it is a declaration of partnership, a commitment to face the storms of life together, no matter the cost. The unjust punishment that Rhiannon endures, her servitude, her humiliation, is a bitter reminder of the cruelty that can often accompany the lives of those who stand at the crossroads of power and fate. And yet, even as Rhiannon endures, Poole's love never wavers. He is with her, fighting for her dignity, determined to prove her innocence, and in doing so, he learns the depth of his own strength. But Rhiannon, too, must learn and grow through this trial. In her silence, her suffering, and her eventual redemption, she transforms. Her connection to the divine remains, but she is forever changed by the experience. She learns that even gods and queens are not exempt from the trials of life. Her human vulnerability is laid bare for all to see, and it is through this vulnerability that she becomes more than just a goddess. She becomes a symbol of resilience, a woman who can endure even the darkest of times and emerge stronger for it. Through these trials, Poole and Rhiannon evolve as individuals and as a couple. Their relationship is not one that is defined by a single moment or event. Instead, it is forged in the crucible of hardship and sacrifice. The love they share is a quiet, steadfast force that endures the pain and the doubts, the questions and the fears. It is in their shared moments of loss, of separation, and of eventual reunion that they learn the true meaning of loyalty and power. Poole, the king who first sought Rhiannon's hand, transforms in his own way. His heart has grown wiser through his trials, and he learns to see beyond the surface. The events that unfold show him the cost of power, the weight of responsibility, and the importance of standing by those we love, no matter how difficult the path. He realizes that to rule is not merely to command, it is to understand, to protect, and to share in the burdens of those who depend on him. Rhiannon, in turn, teaches him that power is not simply about strength, but about wisdom. She shows him that true leadership comes from knowing when to fight and when to yield, when to remain silent and when to speak. Through her, Poole learns the importance of patience and understanding, the quiet power that comes from standing beside someone in their darkest hour, and the strength that can only come from facing trials together. Their journey, together, becomes one of mutual growth. They do not simply complement one another, they change each other, molding one another into stronger, more aware individuals. Poole learns from Rhiannon's quiet strength, and Rhiannon learns from Poole's unwavering loyalty. Through their shared experiences, they each find new dimensions to their power. Their love becomes a partnership of wisdom, one where they draw upon their collective strength to navigate the difficult and unpredictable world around them. The trials they face are not easy ones. The separation from their son, the accusations against Rhiannon, the injustice that seems to follow them at every turn, all these events are sharp edges that threaten to tear them apart. But through each moment, they find something deeper in each other. They find a reflection of their own soul in the other, a mirror that shows not just their flaws, but their potential. And in that reflection, they find a deeper connection that binds them together, a connection that cannot be broken by trials or time. When they are reunited, when the chains of punishment are lifted from Rhiannon, it is not just the restoration of a marriage, it is the rebirth of their shared power. They have weathered the storm, and together, they emerge stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected than ever before. Their love is no longer a simple tale of passion or duty. It is a story of survival, of loyalty, and of transformation. It is a bond that has been tested in the most profound of ways and has emerged unbreakable. Through their trials, Poole and Rhiannon prove that love is not just about the moments of joy, it is about the shared experience of hardship, of learning, and of growing together. They show us that true power does not come from dominance, but from the willingness to face life's challenges with the one you love. Through the deeds they both perform, their love and loyalty echo through the ages, a reminder of the strength that can be found in mutual respect and the wisdom gained through hardship. Their journey is not just their own, it is a journey that speaks to the heart of what it means to love and to live, side by side. The soft rustling of wings fills the air as Rhiannon's birds take flight, their feathers shimmering against the setting sun. Every beat of their wings carries the weight of centuries, echoing the eternal rhythms of life and death. The world around them changes with each passing moment, but the birds remain, constant and unwavering, a living reminder of the cycles that shape all existence. They are more than just creatures of the sky, they are symbols of something deeper, something ancient, a truth that stretches beyond the limits of time. In the world of Welsh mythology, time is not linear. It does not move in a straight line, from one moment to the next, but instead flows in a spiral, a circle that constantly returns upon itself. Seasons shift, life begins and ends, only to begin again in a never-ending dance of birth, death, and rebirth. This is the essence of the cycles that govern the world, and Rhiannon's birds embody this truth in the most profound way. When they soar through the sky, they are not merely moving from place to place. They are embodying the very pulse of the earth itself, the heartbeat of nature that cannot be stopped. In their flight, they mirror the changes that sweep through the world, the slow, inevitable turning of the seasons. Winter gives way to spring, the earth becomes fertile once more, only to be swallowed again by the cold grip of autumn. But in this endless loop, there is hope. There is always a promise of something new, something reborn. And that promise is carried by Rhiannon's birds, whose song rings out like a call to the future. Their song is not just a melody, but a message, one that speaks of life's fragile beauty, of moments that pass too quickly, and yet, of the certainty that they will return. The birds are both mournful and hopeful, their voices rising and falling like the tides. In their calls, there is an echo of every joy and every sorrow that has ever been felt. And yet, even in the darkest moments, when the world seems to be at its end, the birds sing with a certainty that life will continue. They are the keepers of that promise. Rhiannon herself is woven into these cycles. She is both a goddess and a mother, bound by the rhythms of nature, just as the birds are. Her power is not something that exists outside of the world, it is part of it, rooted in the very fabric of existence. She is the embodiment of the cycles of life, standing at the crossroads of birth and death, of change and stasis. Through her, we see that there is no true end. There is only transformation. Her own story reflects this cyclical nature. From her first appearance, when she is seen riding through the world with grace and power, to her moments of trial and suffering, to her eventual redemption, Rhiannon's journey is one of constant renewal. Even when she is punished and separated from her son, she does not remain broken. She endures, and in her endurance, she grows stronger. The pain she experiences is not a permanent wound, but a part of the endless process of change that defines her existence. Like the birds, she is always moving forward, always becoming. Rhiannon's relationship with her birds is a reflection of this eternal process. They are not just her companions, they are a manifestation of the cycles that shape her life. When they sing, they do not just sing of the past, they sing of the future, of the endless possibilities that lie ahead. Their flight is a reminder that no matter what happens, no matter how harsh the winters may be or how dark the days may grow, the sun will always rise again. The birds are the heralds of that dawn, the messengers of hope. As Rhiannon's birds fly across the sky, they remind us that all things are connected. The birds do not live outside of the world, they are a part of it. They are as much a part of the cycle as the trees that shed their leaves in the fall, as the flowers that bloom in the spring. Everything is interconnected, bound together by the unspoken rhythms of the earth. The birds carry this truth with them, their wings a reminder of the endless flow of time that carries us all. But there is also something deeply personal about the birds. They are not just symbols of abstract forces, they are tied to Rhiannon herself, a reflection of her inner journey. Just as the birds travel through the world, Rhiannon too moves through time, changing and transforming, yet always remaining herself. In the quiet moments, when the birds rest on the earth, they remind her of the quiet spaces between the storms, the moments of stillness that allow for growth and reflection. And when they take to the skies again, they remind her that even in the most difficult times, the cycle will continue, and she will continue with it. There is a sacredness in the repetition of these cycles. The passing of the seasons, the rise and fall of life, the constant movement of time, all these things are sacred because they remind us of the forces that are beyond our control, the forces that shape the world. The birds are the messengers of these forces, carrying the wisdom of the ages in their song. They are the witnesses to the transformation of the world, and in their flight, they offer us the chance to understand it too. Rhiannon's story is one of transformation, but it is also one of acceptance. She accepts the cycles of life, with all their beauty and their pain. She knows that nothing is permanent, but that does not make it any less valuable. The beauty of a single moment, the promise of a new day, the hope that rises with every dawn, all these things are tied to the eternal cycles of nature, and Rhiannon understands this in a way that few others can. She does not resist the changes that come her way. Instead, she embraces them, knowing that with each change, there is the possibility of something new, something better. The birds, with their songs of life, death, and rebirth, are a reminder of this truth. They are the living embodiment of nature's eternal cycles, and through them, Rhiannon's story unfolds, a tale of transformation that echoes through the ages. With every beat of their wings, they carry with them the promise of the future, the hope that, no matter how difficult the journey may be, the cycles will continue, and life will always find a way to return. The sky was darkening as the storm began to swirl, the winds howling across the land, carrying with them the scent of salt and the echo of sorrow. A single figure stood on the cliffs, her hair wild in the wind, her eyes distant and lost in thought. Branwen, daughter of the mighty King Llyr, was a figure caught in the harsh grip of fate. In her heart, a storm raged, more destructive than any wind that could whip through the seas. Her beauty, grace, and kindness, which had once made her beloved, had now become the seeds of tragedy. Branwen's tale is one woven with the very threads of destiny, power, and heartbreak. It is the story of a woman trapped in a world shaped by the whims of men, and yet, through her suffering, a tale of justice begins to unfurl. It is a story that mirrors Rhiannon's own, echoing the themes of fate and the cost of love, as well as the struggle for justice. Where one tale speaks of rebirth, the other speaks of death, yet both share the burden of womanhood, both trapped in the unforgiving hands of time. Branwen's tragedy begins with her marriage to the King of Ireland, a union intended to solidify peace between her people and the Irish. She is sent to the island as a bride, her heart full of hope and loyalty, dreaming of bringing harmony. But when she arrives, her beauty does not win her husband's heart. Instead, it ignites his jealousy. She is cruelly mistreated by the very man she was meant to trust. In the isolation of a foreign court, she is beaten, starved, and reduced to nothing more than a servant to the very people who should have loved her. The echoes of her suffering ripple through the lands, a silent scream carried by the winds. And yet, through all her torment, Branwen does not falter in her resolve. Her suffering is deep, but her spirit remains unbroken. In the darkest moments, when all hope seems lost, she sends a secret message to her brother, the great Bran the Blessed. It is a cry for help, one that will set in motion events far beyond what she could ever have imagined. The destruction that follows is swift and unforgiving, as war erupts between the Welsh and the Irish, brought on by Branwen's silent call for aid. As blood is spilled, and lives are lost in the chaos of the battle, the tragedy of Branwen's tale becomes more apparent. Her fate, bound by the men around her, leads to nothing but death and destruction. She is the spark of conflict, the cause of the ruin, but it is not her fault. She, like Rhiannon, is a victim of the world she is born into, one where women, regardless of their wisdom or power, are often swept away by the tide of events set in motion by those who do not understand them. In the midst of it all, Branwen's fate is sealed not by her own actions, but by the cruel hand of the world around her. Her brother, Bran the Blessed, would eventually seek revenge, but it is too late to undo the damage. Branwen dies broken-hearted, still carrying the weight of the tragedy on her shoulders. The story of her death, however, does not simply end in despair. It becomes a symbol, a reminder of the fragile and fleeting nature of peace, and the devastating cost of a woman's pain in a world where her voice is too often silenced. There, in the sorrow of Branwen's death, a link to Rhiannon's own journey becomes clear. Both women face the crushing weight of male-dominated societies, and both are victims of injustice, whether it is through Rhiannon's wrongful punishment for a crime she did not commit or Branwen's suffering in the hands of an unworthy husband. The two women, though separated by time and space, are united by the same struggle. They are both embodiments of the strength of women in a world that would see them broken. Yet, the justice that Branwen longs for never comes in her lifetime. Her death is not avenged by her own hand, but by the actions of men who seek to rectify the wrongs done to her. This is where Rhiannon's story diverges. Though Rhiannon too suffers at the hands of men, her story has a different ending. Her strength and resolve lead to her redemption, and in the end, justice is served. The lessons learned from the pain of these women are not forgotten. In their sorrow, the gods listen. In their trials, the world is changed. The tragedy of Branwen serves as a stark reminder of the harshness of fate, but also of the quiet strength that exists within all women, even when their voices are not heard. Rhiannon's story, though marked by suffering, is ultimately a tale of triumph, a victory over the forces that would see her broken. For all of Branwen's pain, there is also the promise of something greater that lingers on the horizon. Justice, though delayed, is still possible. Through the tragic story of Branwen, the mythological world surrounding Rhiannon becomes all the more vivid and intertwined. Both women, though shaped by similar forces, face different outcomes. The contrast between their fates is not a simple one of right and wrong, of good versus evil. It is the struggle of women caught in the sweep of fate, of power, and of love. Just as Rhiannon's story is interwoven with the power of birds and their eternal symbolism of life and death, Branwen's story carries with it the burden of loss and the promise of justice, no matter how long it may take to arrive. Her death is not just an end, it is a transformation, an awakening to the truth of what is right. In the shadow of Branwen's tragic tale, we see the world through a different lens. It is not just the gods who shape the world, but also the struggles of the people, particularly the women, whose lives are too often marred by the choices of others. Rhiannon and Branwen, though distinct in their stories, both carry the weight of these themes: fate, justice, love, and the fight to be heard in a world that often remains silent to the cries of those who need it the most. There is a place where the veil between worlds is thin, a space where the living and the divine can touch. It is in this space that Rhiannon exists, straddling the boundaries of both. She is not fully one, nor the other. She is something more, a being who moves between the mortal world and the other world, her presence a bridge between the seen and the unseen, the human and the divine. Rhiannon, with her ethereal beauty and sharp wisdom, is both a queen and a goddess, but perhaps more importantly, she is a figure of transition, of movement. She is neither confined by the laws of men nor fully bound by the immortality of the gods. She inhabits the liminal space where both realms meet, a place of in-between. And it is in this space that her true power lies. At times, she is the shining light of the court, revered by all who come to her for counsel. Yet, there are moments when she slips away, when she disappears into the shadows, into the quiet whispers of the wind, only to return with answers no one could have anticipated. It is during these moments of silence that she feels the pulse of the other world, where the spirits and deities dwell, watching and waiting. Her relationship with them is not one of distance, but one of intimacy, a connection that pulls her between the two worlds, like the ebb and flow of the tide. Her birds, the sacred creatures that follow her wherever she goes, are not just animals. They are messengers. Their song is not only a sound, it is a language. The birds' calls echo with the power of prophecy, with ancient knowledge and wisdom, and they carry the stories of the other world across the boundaries of life and death. When they sing, it is not just a song, it is a message from the beyond, a whisper from the divine to the living. Rhiannon's birds are the messengers between worlds, the creatures who fly between the mortal realm and the unseen realms of gods and spirits. Their flight is not bound by earthly laws, and in their song, Rhiannon hears the voices of those who dwell beyond. They bring messages of warning, of hope, of destiny. They carry the weight of prophecies and omens, linking the lives of the mortals to the divine will of the gods. It is through these birds that Rhiannon is able to see the path ahead, to understand the movements of the stars and the whispers of fate. But it is not just through her birds that Rhiannon connects with the other world. She herself is a part of it, a living manifestation of its mysteries. Her beauty and her strength, her wisdom and her sorrow, these qualities are not just hers, but reflections of the divine power that courses through her veins. When she speaks, it is not just the voice of a mortal queen, but the voice of something older, something more eternal. It is the voice of the goddess who exists beyond time, a voice that has been heard by kings and queens, by warriors, and by spirits. Rhiannon's relationship with the other world is a relationship of reciprocity. She is not merely a passive receiver of divine knowledge. She gives as much as she takes. Her actions, her choices, shape the world around her and the lives of those she encounters. She is a ruler in her own right, but her power is not born of domination. It is a power that flows through her, a gift from the gods that allows her to walk freely between the realms. She is both queen and oracle, both human and divine. In the quiet moments, when the noise of the world falls away, Rhiannon listens. She listens to the song of her birds, to the whispers that echo from the otherworld. The voices are faint, but they are clear, messages from those who dwell beyond the veil, from the gods, from the spirits, from the ancestors. They are warnings, and sometimes, they are blessings. Through her connection with the otherworld, Rhiannon understands the flow of time in a way others cannot. She knows the patterns, the cycles, the rise and fall of kingdoms, and the fate of those she loves. She can see the threads of destiny weaving through the lives of others, and sometimes she is able to alter the course of fate, guiding the future with the wisdom she has gained. Her ability to bridge these worlds, to serve as a conduit between the living and the divine, is not without its cost. The weight of the knowledge she carries, the constant pull of the otherworld, is a burden that only she can bear. At times, it is a lonely existence, for while she walks with the gods, she also walks apart from the mortals. They do not understand the depth of her connection to the unseen world, nor the responsibility that comes with it. But she bears it quietly, knowing that her place is necessary, that without her, the boundaries between the worlds would remain closed. Her birds, too, carry this burden. They are not merely creatures of beauty, but embodiments of the gods' will, each feather carrying the weight of prophecy and fate. They fly between the worlds, bringing news of the gods to the living, and offering the living a glimpse into the unseen world. They are symbols of transformation, of the fluidity between life and death, of the eternal cycles that govern existence. And in their flight, they remind Rhiannon of her own power, her role as a bridge between the two worlds. It is in these moments of silence, when the birds are still and the winds have calmed, that Rhiannon feels the full weight of her role. She is both part of the world and apart from it. She is a queen, a goddess, and a messenger, all at once. The otherworld is never far from her, and in every decision she makes, and every step she takes, she is guided by its unseen forces. Rhiannon's relationship with the otherworld is one of constant motion, a movement between the realms of the living and the divine. It is not a simple relationship, nor is it one that can be easily understood. But in her connection to the birds, and her ability to listen to the whispers of the gods, Rhiannon embodies the very essence of what it means to be a liminal figure, a being who bridges the worlds, who carries the messages of fate and prophecy, and who, with every breath, keeps the boundaries between life and death from collapsing. Rhiannon's name is more than just a whisper carried by the winds of time. It is a sound that reverberates through the ages, carrying with it the weight of stories untold and the echoes of a legacy that has shaped the very fabric of Welsh and Celtic mythology. Her myth has survived centuries, passed from one generation to the next, finding new life in each retelling. But what is it about her story that continues to resonate so deeply, even in our modern world? Her legacy is a thread woven into the tapestry of time, an enduring symbol of strength, transformation, and the balance between the mortal and divine. Rhiannon's influence stretches far beyond the borders of her own myth, touching upon countless other figures and stories within the Celtic world. Her presence, though quiet, is undeniable, a testament to the power of myth and its ability to shape culture and thought across generations. In the years following the telling of Rhiannon's tale, her influence seeped into the very core of Welsh and Celtic traditions. She became a symbol of divine femininity, one who moved with grace and wisdom, embodying both the celestial and the earthly. Her connection to the birds, the land, and the heavens, all blended into one seamless embodiment of life cycles, of the passage of time. These aspects of her story were so profound that they rippled through the culture, leaving their mark on the art, customs, and spiritual practices of the people. It is through art that Rhiannon's legacy has perhaps been most vividly preserved. Paintings, sculptures, and tapestries all carry the symbols of her myth: birds in flight, the shape of a crown, and the ethereal glow of a goddess. Each stroke of the brush, each careful detail, evokes the beauty and mystery that surrounds her, reminding us of the divine qualities she embodies. Through the centuries, artists have taken her story and molded it into something new, reinterpreting her role and significance in their own time, but always with the same underlying message. Rhiannon is a figure of transformation and power, a woman whose presence transcends the bounds of mythology and speaks to the hearts of those who seek understanding. In folklore, Rhiannon's story has been transformed, adapted, and interwoven into the lives of new generations. Her legacy endures in the songs and stories told around hearths and the quiet murmurs of those who still remember her name. While the exact details of her myth may change over time, the essence of who she is remains. She is the protector, the guide, and the symbol of enduring strength. Her trials, her punishments, her ability to rise above the injustices she faces, these are stories that echo through the collective memory of the people, teaching lessons of resilience, justice, and the power of transformation. Modern interpretations of Rhiannon have brought her into new realms through literature, music, and even contemporary spiritual practices. Her role as a powerful yet compassionate figure, one who connects the mortal world with the divine, has made her an icon for those seeking to reclaim their own strength and wisdom. Writers and poets have continued to draw upon her myth, using her as a symbol of both divine justice and the eternal struggle between fate and free will. She is a figure whose story has found new life in the pages of books, in the lyrics of songs, and in the hearts of those who long to understand the mysteries of the world. But Rhiannon's influence doesn't stop at the artists or the poets. She is a figure whose power can be seen in the way she influenced the development of later mythological characters and stories. Her traits, the fierce strength tempered by compassion, the wisdom gained through suffering, the ability to connect the earthly and the divine, can be found in other figures throughout Celtic mythology. Rhiannon's story set the precedent for the kind of women who would follow in her footsteps, from fierce warrior queens to wise goddesses, each carrying a piece of her legacy within them. Her impact can also be seen in the broader themes that echo through Celtic myth. The cycles of life, death, and rebirth, themes central to her own story, are reflected in the stories of many other Celtic deities and figures. The reverence for the natural world, the belief in the interconnectedness of all life, the acceptance of fate alongside the recognition of personal strength. These are all elements that can be traced back to Rhiannon's myth. She was a harbinger of these themes, a figure who embodied them fully, and her influence continues to shape the worldview of those who encounter her story. Rhiannon's legacy is not only about what she represents in myth, but also about what she has come to symbolize in the hearts of people across generations. She is a figure of great empathy, a goddess who understands the pain of loss and the beauty of healing. She is the voice of those who are misunderstood, a beacon of light for those who have been unjustly silenced. Her trials, her suffering, and her ultimate triumphs serve as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility for change, for redemption, and for the restoration of justice. It is her unwavering presence that makes her story so enduring. Rhiannon is not a distant, unattainable figure. She is a woman who lived, loved, and suffered, and her story continues to speak to those who seek to understand their own journey through the cycles of life. In every retelling of her myth, she remains a timeless figure, a reflection of the strength and resilience that lives within us all. As long as there are stories to be told, as long as there are songs to be sung, Rhiannon's influence will remain. Her myth will continue to shape the hearts of those who come after, teaching them about the power of transformation, the importance of justice, and the eternal dance between the mortal and the divine. Her legacy, like the bird she commands, will always find its way back to the people, carrying with it the lessons of the past and the promise of the future. The birds circled above, their wings beating in a rhythm known only to the heavens. Their songs echoed through the air, a melody filled with both sorrow and promise. In the distance, the figure of Rhiannon stood, her eyes lifted toward the sky, as if listening to the whispers of the birds themselves. To the people who worshipped her, she was more than a goddess, she was a force, a presence that connected the very threads of life and death, the mortal and divine. Through her, the mysteries of the world were revealed, not just in stories, but in the very essence of nature itself. Rhiannon, like the bird she commands, embodies the unspoken truths of the universe, the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. She is a goddess who transcends time, her power extending not just over the living, but also over what lies beyond. She is not bound by the limits of the earth. Instead, she flies between the worlds, a messenger of both fate and prophecy. The birds, with their hauntingly beautiful songs, are her messengers, carrying her will and her wisdom to all who listen. They are not just animals, they are the bridge between the known and the unknown, between the here and the hereafter. Her connection to other goddesses is undeniable. Rhiannon shares qualities with many ancient figures who also wielded power over the realms of the living and the dead. The similarity between Rhiannon and figures like the Morrigan is unmistakable. Both women are associated with prophecy, with fate, and with the forces that guide the world. The Morrigan, with her fierce presence, and Rhiannon, with her more gentle, yet equally powerful, grace, embody different aspects of the same divine energy. Where the Morrigan's power is fierce and often destructive, Rhiannon's is more subtle, yet no less potent. She is the goddess who, through her wisdom, brings change and transformation, not through battle, but through understanding. But it is not only in wisdom and prophecy that Rhiannon shines. She is also a goddess of fertility and death. The delicate balance between these two opposing forces is embodied in her very being. Just as the birds soar high above, she moves between the realms of life and death, carrying the power to both give life and take it away. In the ancient world, this was not seen as a contradiction but as a necessary balance. The land was fertile, but it needed death to fertilize it, to bring forth new growth. Rhiannon's role as a goddess of fertility is not just about bringing new life into the world, it is about understanding the importance of death in the grand scheme of things. The two are inseparable in her eyes, one cannot exist without the other. The birds, her most faithful companions, embody this duality. They are symbols of transformation, of the passage from life to death and from death to life again. Their migration, their return, and their songs all speak to the eternal nature of existence. Rhiannon's birds are the messengers between the worlds, reminding the living that death is not an end, but a beginning. They show that wisdom comes not just through the living, but also through the understanding of what lies beyond. And in this, Rhiannon stands as a goddess of eternal life, a being who transcends the mortal realm and moves between the worlds, bringing with her the wisdom of the ages. Her connection to fertility, wisdom, and death is not just symbolic. It is embodied in the very rituals and practices of the ancient peoples who honored her. In ceremonies meant to ensure the fertility of the land, Rhiannon's name would be spoken, her blessings sought. The people understood that to receive her gifts, they had to honor her connection to the cycles of life, to the delicate balance that keeps the world turning. They would leave offerings, sing songs, and perform rituals, all in an effort to invoke her power. She was not a distant goddess, but one who dwelled among them, watching over the land and its people, guiding them through both the times of plenty and the times of famine. But Rhiannon was not just a goddess of the earth. She also stood as a figure who connected her people to the divine. Through her, they could reach beyond the physical world and touch the realm of the gods. Her birds were not just symbols of her power, they were the means through which the living could communicate with the divine. When the people were in need of guidance or prophecy, they would listen to the birds, waiting for their song to reveal the answers to the questions they carried in their hearts. These birds, like Rhiannon herself, were sacred, embodying the wisdom of the ages and the messages of the gods. Rhiannon's role in these ancient rituals was profound. She was both a guide and a protector, watching over the people not just in life, but in death as well. Her understanding of the cycles of the world meant that she was always present, always available to those who sought her help. Through the rituals, the people invoked her presence, seeking her blessings for a good harvest, for the health of their children, and for guidance in times of hardship. But they also honored her as a goddess of the afterlife, understanding that death was not a final end, but a transition to something new. In this way, Rhiannon's role was both practical and spiritual, guiding her people not just in their everyday lives, but through the greater mysteries of existence. The ancient practices surrounding Rhiannon are filled with reverence for her wisdom and power. She was not simply a goddess of fertility or death, she was a figure of balance, of harmony. She taught her people that to live fully, they had to embrace both life and death, wisdom and ignorance, light and dark. Her connection to the birds was a symbol of this balance. Her birds flew between the worlds, carrying the messages of both life and death, of hope and despair, of wisdom and ignorance. They reminded the people that the world was not just a place of earthly concerns, but a realm filled with divine forces that needed to be respected and understood. In the end, Rhiannon's story is one of transformation. Through her, the people learned to understand the deeper mysteries of life, to see beyond the physical world and into the realms of the divine. Her role as both a goddess of fertility and death, wisdom and prophecy, shows the depth of her power and the importance of embracing all aspects of existence. She was not just a goddess who existed in myth, she was a living, breathing presence in the world, guiding the people with her wisdom and her birds, teaching them to move between the worlds as she did. Through her, they came to understand the cycles of the earth, the cycles of life, and the endless flow of time. The wind carries a whisper across the land, a song from the past that stirs something in the heart. It's faint at first, barely more than a rustle, but it grows stronger as the days pass. In the quiet moments of reflection, when the world feels too loud, there's a sudden remembrance of an ancient story, one of a goddess whose name echoes with power, Rhiannon. The birds that once circled above the earth, carrying her wisdom between the realms, still sing their tune, albeit faintly, beneath the surface of modern life. In the age of change, when the world feels more connected than ever, there is a quiet but growing resurgence. The myth of Rhiannon is being reclaimed, not as a dusty relic of the past, but as a living force, relevant, vital, and stirring. People are rediscovering her, drawing strength from her story, finding in her both a beacon and a guide. She has not been forgotten. Rather, her myth is being rewritten, reinterpreted, and celebrated once again. The world around her has changed, but the essence of who Rhiannon is, what she represents, remains timeless. The modern-day interpretation of Rhiannon's story is a powerful one, especially within the context of contemporary feminism. In an age when women's voices are demanding to be heard, Rhiannon's myth offers a reflection of strength, resilience, and autonomy. She is a goddess who has long defied the roles that others try to assign her. In her, there is no submission to fate, no giving in to societal expectations. Her choices, her actions, are hers alone to make. Whether it's her resilience in the face of unjust punishment or her unwavering commitment to her child and her people, Rhiannon represents a figure of self-determination. She does not wait for permission to act, she does not apologize for her power. In an era where women are reclaiming their place in history and in mythology, Rhiannon's story serves as a powerful reminder that women have always been agents of change. She stands as a symbol of what it means to take control of your own destiny, to define your worth, to carve a path that is uniquely yours. The reimagining of Rhiannon in the context of modern feminism is not just about seeing her as a warrior goddess or a figure of mythical power, it's about recognizing that she has always been that and more. Rhiannon is not confined to a singular, passive role. She is complex, multifaceted, and unapologetically herself. But the resurgence of Rhiannon is not confined to just one area of life. There is also a renewed connection to her spiritual aspects. In a world that often feels disconnected from the natural rhythms of life, Rhiannon's story reminds us of the deeper, spiritual ties that bind us all. Her connection to the cycles of nature, the seasons, and the very earth beneath our feet calls us back to a more sacred understanding of life. Her birds, ever present in her story, have become symbols not just of wisdom but of a return to reverence for the environment. The birds speak of the changing of seasons, of birth and death, and of the deep connection we all share with the natural world. Environmentalism, too, finds a kindred spirit in Rhiannon's story. In the ancient world, she was associated with the fertile land, the cycles of growth and decay. Today, as we grapple with the consequences of environmental destruction, Rhiannon's myth calls us back to a time when humans lived in balance with the earth. Her role as a protector of the land and its creatures speaks to the growing awareness of the need for conservation and respect for the planet. Rhiannon's birds, which once carried her wisdom across the heavens, are now symbols of the fragility of nature, reminding us that we must nurture and protect the world we share. Her myth challenges us to see the earth not as something to be used and discarded, but as something sacred, something worth saving. As the world looks for new ways to understand and honor the earth, Rhiannon's legacy offers a powerful blueprint. She was never just a passive observer, she was an active participant in the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. She is a goddess who embodies the eternal nature of these cycles, showing us that death is not the end, but a step in a continuous process of transformation. Her birds, ever circling the skies, are the embodiment of that transformation, carrying with them messages of renewal, growth, and change. The lessons they impart are not just ancient whispers, but living truths that resonate today, reminding us of our responsibility to the world we inhabit. In the midst of the noise and distractions of the modern world, Rhiannon's myth provides a quiet space for reflection, for reconnecting with the deeper parts of ourselves and the world around us. Her birds carry the stories of the past, but they also speak to the present and the future. They are symbols of a wisdom that transcends time, offering insight into the challenges we face today. In a time when so much feels uncertain, the resurgence of Rhiannon's story provides both comfort and clarity, a reminder that the cycles of the earth will continue, that wisdom will always find its way, and that we have the power to shape our own destinies. The revival of Rhiannon's myth in modern culture is not just about revisiting old stories. It's about reclaiming the power of those stories, making them our own, and using them to fuel the changes we want to see in the world. As women continue to rise in strength and voice, as the earth continues to call out for protection, and as people seek a deeper spiritual connection to the world, Rhiannon's myth offers guidance. She was a goddess who saw beyond the limits of the physical world, who moved through the realms of life, death, and rebirth with grace and power. Her legacy is one of transformation, of wisdom, and of the eternal dance between life and death. And today, as in ancient times, her story continues to inspire, to teach, and to guide. The sound of birdsong rises softly in the early morning air, a melody that feels both ancient and timeless. It carries with it the weight of centuries, echoing across the land like a forgotten prayer that has been passed down through the ages. There is something both haunting and comforting in the way the birds call to each other, their voices intertwining in a harmony that reaches deep into the heart. It is as if the wind itself remembers the story of Rhiannon, the goddess whose connection to the natural world, to life and death, to fate and justice, is woven into every note of their song. The world may have changed since the first whispers of her myth were told in the hills and valleys of ancient Wales, but Rhiannon's story has not faded with time. It lingers, growing stronger with each passing generation, like the birds that carry her name. Her tale is a living one, not confined to the pages of old texts or the dust of forgotten memories. It is a story that breathes, that evolves, that finds new meaning in every era it touches. As long as the birds continue to sing, Rhiannon's presence endures, her wisdom timeless. There is a profound magic in the way her myth transcends the boundaries of time. What once seemed like ancient legend has become a part of something much larger. It speaks to us across the centuries, its themes just as relevant today as they were when the first fire was lit in the darkness of winter nights. The birds, with their connection to the cycles of nature, remind us that transformation is not something that happens once, but an ongoing process, a constant rhythm of death and rebirth. Rhiannon's story is not a tale of endings, but of continual renewal. It teaches us that the struggles of the past are never truly gone, they circle back, just as the seasons do, each time bringing something new, something unexpected. In the quiet moments, when we look at the birds soaring through the sky or hear their distant calls, it's easy to see that Rhiannon's myth is not just a piece of history, but an ever-present truth. The birds are more than just messengers. They are symbols of the continuity of life, of the never-ending flow of time. They remind us of the power of transformation and the strength that comes from embracing change. Rhiannon, as a goddess of both life and death, embodies this truth fully. Her story is a reflection of the constant dance between what is and what will be. In the quiet spaces between moments, her legacy persists, a thread woven through the fabric of everything that is. Rhiannon's song is not a single note, but a symphony that stretches across time and space. It is a song of justice and of the choices we make, of the consequences of our actions, and the way those actions ripple through the ages. Justice, in her myth, is not about vengeance or punishment, but about balance. It is a law that governs the natural world, where the cycles of life and death are not arbitrary but are as necessary as the turning of the seasons. Every choice we make, every action we take, is part of that grand design. Rhiannon, in all her power and complexity, teaches us that to live in harmony with the world around us is to understand the deep connections that bind all things together. When we listen closely to her myth, to the soft fluttering of the wings, we hear the quiet call of justice, a reminder that every action has a ripple effect, and that true power lies in the ability to create balance, not chaos. Her birds are messengers, yes, but also witnesses. They carry with them the wisdom of the world, and their song is a reflection of the order that underpins the universe. Even when everything feels chaotic, when we feel lost or disconnected, we can always return to the bird's song, to Rhiannon's quiet guidance, and find a path forward. In a world that often seems to forget the deep ties between the living and the dead, the past and the present, Rhiannon's story offers a bridge. It calls us to remember that there is no finality in life, no true end. The cycles of nature, birth, death, rebirth, continue in an endless loop, and we, too, are part of that cycle. Her myth reminds us that we are connected not just to each other, but to the earth itself, to the birds that fly above us, to the wind that carries their song. And through this connection, we can find our place in the world, knowing that our actions, our stories, will continue to echo long after we are gone. The birds that circle above Rhiannon, the birds that carry the weight of her myth, are not just creatures of the earth, they are messengers of the magical world that exists just beyond our reach. They are the ones who show us that the boundary between life and death is not as solid as we think. They are the bridge, the pathway, between the realms, guiding us from one world to the next, reminding us that what we cannot see is just as real as what we can. And so, Rhiannon's legacy remains, as eternal as the birds themselves. Through every twist of fate, every turn of history, her presence has endured. She is as much a part of today as she was in the ancient world, and her song, carried on the wings of birds, will continue to be sung for generations to come. The magic of her story is not locked in the past, but alive, living and breathing in the hearts of those who remember. Her myth is a story not of endings, but of continuity. It is a reminder that, no matter how far we may stray from the paths of our ancestors, we are always connected to the cycles of life, to the eternal dance of transformation that has always been. The birds will always return, and with them, Rhiannon's song will continue to echo across time.